listening to the recording and they want to know about not just like what we've talked about, but any of the mechanisms that we might apply today, they can go back and check those out on the YouTube. Another reminder to folks, we've recently gone through a URL facelift for a FHIR project. So that's, if you haven't updated your bookmarks already, that is the new URL. I just put out a post earlier in the week about the canonical URL, letting folks know, you know, in the kind of midterm future, we're looking at shifting our canonical URL as well, and that we're targeting it after we complete our 1.2 updates, which is going to be our really big focus for today. So we're going to start just putting out communication wherever possible to let folks know eventually the canonical URL will be changing and what you do about that, and you know how you can continue using your established packages if you want a little bit more time to prepare for the migration. So today is all about
Sharon.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Elliot.
So one comment about that notice. Changing canonical URLs is a really bad thing to do. And we really shouldn't be doing it, but we're being forced into it.
Correct.
And I don't want anybody who reads that to think that this is any way condoning this as a good behavior. It's really a really bad one, but there's not much we can do about it.
Yeah. And so, so you're referring, this was the kind of the post that we put in there, and we, you know, where possible, I've just been trying to kind of point out, like, we've had a ton of discussion around like why this happened and how we came to the decision that we had to. Should we modify this in some way and just indicate like, you know, we anticipate, because in some ways, like as a baseline, we have a little bit more protections than, or I should say, we have a little bit less impact than the average project that does this. But to your point is still the same, which is there are impacts, and we always want to avoid doing this if we have to, particularly this late in the game, given that it's been a very long time since we first established the project.
Yeah.
Is it like maybe like throw like a secondary follow-up in there? I mean, you've been through the whole conversation, so like you have all the context behind the, we didn't want to, but we kind of have to.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just reply. Because what I don't want people to come away from that with is, oh, well, CA baseline changed their canonical. It's okay for me to change mine on whatever my project is.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll just reply to that one.
And I think the comment is still very, very valid to the folks that are on the call now, right? So like we're reflecting on this, having discussed this over the last 12 months and kind of fully understanding kind of the drivers behind it. But just because it's a comment regarding the change doesn't necessarily mean that like in your own projects, we should be following the same approach. But one of the things that you should be doing in your own projects is trying to evaluate whether or not you're making the same mistakes that we did with using HL7 in our URL, and to avoid doing so if you are at the point where you're actually making that decision as well. So a lesson that was learned the hard way, I think, for us. So just on the housekeeping front, so we've got the kind of the initial kind of heads up. I think we're going to try to target at least 2 or 3 more updates as we near a little bit closer. And the focus for now for 1.2 is really to try to get any of the kind of things that we see as what would be more considered like, not, maybe they are breaking changes, right? So they are more substantial changes, either to fix invariants that were previously breaking, or one of the discussions that we want to have today is examining some of the invariants that we had in play and whether or not there are other alternatives and ways of expressing the same expectation outside of an invariant. So in that sense, it is like a loosened change from rules that we previously had in play, potentially. So that's why, like, even though we've just put out a 1.1.8, which is like a bug fix, just repackaged, I'll put the link in here with the sub value sets that we've been discussing over the last couple months. So if folks want to try 1.1.8, we anticipate the changes that we've been talking on the profiling stream regarding the invariants have a more substantial heft to them. And so that's what we're going to kind of put towards 1.2, with 2.0 being more focused on kind of overall QA and that canonical URL change. We've been working on allergy, but I actually thought there is the last kind of two pieces in allergy have a tie-in to a similar pattern that we have in device that we hinted at the last call. And I wanted to actually bring it up first to do a little bit of framing ahead of time. So this all started because we were doing QA and we'd identified there are some errors that IG Publisher was producing about our profiles. Some of those profiles errors were resulting from invariants that we had claimed. And many of them were initially because the invariants were placed in like the wrong part of the actual profile. So if they targeted multiple elements, they were applied to a single element. And that would be one of the things that like would catch us up in these types of these errors. With some of these, like there's a UDI invariant, and keeping in mind, like these are some of these profiles like device were initially created through one of the three substreams. I think we had clinical, we had medications, and we had entities, which is like person, organization, practitioner, that kind of thing. It's been 4 years. And the original process was to start with the constraints that we were seeing pop up in things like US core to understand, okay, well, what are the types of things that often do get localized? And then apply kind of the lens of, from a Canadian perspective, and like how healthcare is delivered and the concepts that we see, like the types of identifiers that we have and the way that our systems work, you know, what is the Canadian kind of localized version of that? And in many cases, we relaxed constraints that were originally in US core because it just didn't map up to our understanding of our current ecosystem capabilities or our current understanding of our intent as a baseline. But sometimes, especially on profiles that really didn't get a lot of activity, like device, because we don't really have a ton of device prior profiles in Canada that we were doing comparisons against when we were doing due diligence, we see items that are like you can like forensically track back to original decisions in US core. Device has an invariant that's currently flagging us an error that squarely fits that bill. It was introduced in US core a little over 4 years ago. And so when we originally started with the US core profile, we didn't remove it upon the kind of initial review in the medical stream. Now, important to note, and I'll give you a little bit of, I'll show you what it looks like in our profile today, that this approach has subsequently changed in US core. And so the way that sometimes expectations got layered in became a little bit less rigid and moved more towards like written guidance and expectations. But we never really did that kind of catch up, and we never had the conversation of like, do we want to keep things as they are? Do we have a reason for doing that? So I'm framing it in device and I'm going to show it to you guys, but it's a conversation that we probably should have also in some of the other places that we have some of these invariants, like in allergy and in observation. But I'll at least kind of show you what we're working with. So I've got the baseline profile. This is our CI or build, right? Continuous integration. This is current source of truth based on what's in our GitHub. And I'll show you the QA report real quick that originally flagged this as an issue in our issue log. Oops, 1 second. Let's actually go further down. So device is the one. We had this error and constraint. And if you've been following us as we looked at some of the other invariants, this language probably looks pretty familiar, right? Is not valid against any of these possible types. Sounds a lot like the invariants we've been working on in allergy. And when you actually like look at how it's being applied, the UDI device 1 and 2 rules, you'll find that they're falling into a very similar pattern as what we had applied in allergy and the types of fixes that we applied in allergy, right? In terms of like where the expression was supposed to exist. What's important about this that I think is broader than just fixing the invariant is that these are two rules that are hard rules. So I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to show you guys the rule themselves. So UDI device. So this is an error, meaning like this is not like a soft guidance of this is how something should be. This is if this rule is not met, it is not considered a valid instance against this profile. It will be rejected if you're utilizing the profile as a means of determining what your server will accept and what it won't accept. The actual rule is around representation of this kind of UDI information. Elliot, you're a device guy. I don't actually know what UDI stands for, but
Uniform Device Identifier.
So
or something like
identifier,
that.
and then these are some form of
Carrier human readable form and carrier essentially QR code or barcode.
got it. So essentially this identifier shall be present in like these two locations. Is that how we should kind of interpret the context?
Yeah, so either there is the human readable form or the QR code for the UDI value.
And it looks like this has been, oh, is this an, let me actually take a look at let's take a look at the native FHIR resource real quick together. So you've got this UDI carrier, and then it actually calls out these two locations, right? So this isn't anything that we've introduced with like slicing. We've said there's some must support expectations, but we do have this expectation. What I think is interesting, I'm going to pull out the original US core profile when we first, like this was around 2020, 2019, 2019, and remarkably similar, right? One might say copy and paste similarities. Still, they're shallow.
Probably.
Yep. And I'm going to pull up the current CI build. I can pull up a newer published version if folks want to take a look at it. But what I want to just draw folks' attention to is the invariants that we would have expected had US Core maintained it are missing. And instead, it's been replaced with some profile-specific implementation guidance. So there's not a hard mechanical constraint in place within the profile, but guidance of what the expectations for what is populated and where. And this goes beyond just the device. It also happens in allergy, right? They start shifting towards trying to describe like expectations in this profile-specific implementation guidance rather than invariants. So I thought that was interesting. I don't have the background for entirely all of the drivers behind it, but I think it's something we should react to see, do we think as part of the cleanup effort, we have to also evaluate rather than just fixing this thing, whether or not we actually need this, let me find it, this invariant and what it gets us. So I read this as it ensures that either this or this is populated, even though they don't have an underlying one-to-one cardinality there. Is that other people's reads?
Yes, if you say there is a UDI, we are expecting one of those two things to be filled in. You can't only do the device identifier.
And if we look at what's in US Core, let me see 1 second. This is the newer one. It looks like the cardinality hasn't itself changed as like another mechanical way of dealing with this implementation guidance. Do we want to look at like the way that they've structured it to assess like are they saying the same things? So there's like a little bit around, okay, what is a UDI? And what is considered, must support, so HRF. There's no expression at this time that converts this one to this one. So I read almost like this here. I guess it's like, is this a technical limitation?
No, there's two forms of that you could get this thing in. And what it's saying is that HRF, you need to support HRF, that form, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if you get it in the other form, that you need to convert it to HRF.
Got it. Okay, so there is this kind of like written expectation around HRF, but the guidance is like, basically don't convert it if you don't need to, if it's not appropriate
Right.
to meet the underlying expectation of the profile.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because they basically say shall represent UDI code in this. So this is carrier HRF element.
Yeah. For implantable devices.
Yes, which right now this is the profile, what the profile scope for.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
I don't know if they still have a regular device one.
Well, at the start of those bullet points,
Which
it says
one?
for non-implantable devices use the base resource. Okay.
I think they used to have a device profile and then they moved away from it.
Yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of changes in the base resource over the last couple of years, but probably I guess not in R4. We're still R4, so
Yeah.
So I think when I think about this from like a core perspective, the goal is for them to provide guidance on population of like where it's available. This is the place to go. This is the behavior we want to encourage without it being necessarily punishing from the perspective of if every instance doesn't have it populated here, there's a problem. And I think the baseline shares a lot of that philosophy and probably even more so because the types of rules that we can actually make that are consistent across a bunch of different use cases and implementation guides tend to be a lot more flexible. So what I want to kind of think through is like, if the precedence of US core changing it isn't enough for us to have like a decision, the other side of this is, what does this get us? And is this something that we think is Canadian contextual in nature, or is this a best practice we're trying to encourage to let people like know how to populate the FHIR resource?
Just clarify one thing. This is a US core implantable device profile.
Right.
Very specific constraint, not a device anymore.
Well, it is still a device.
Yes, but I would say they should change the name, but it's not a device anymore. It's a constrained device definition. It's called structure definition profile. But this is one, but that one is different. But this baseline, sorry. But the US core one that Sharon just presented is called US core implantable device. That's the constraint. That's quite different as a baseline device.
That's a good point, because right now, oh no, sorry, it's the URL is still device, but it's scoped to implantables.
that's a big concern, actually. There's inconsistency on their on their web page. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the canonical URL itself doesn't provide the definition. It's the description of the device that says it's implantable. We shouldn't read into the name, we shouldn't read into the canonical URL or the computable name here too much.
But I think we can at least say for this profile, which does incur these implantable device constraints and variants that exist right now, like current scope of the profile is implantable device. And so I think the question remains, which is like, one, I mean, is this appropriate for a baseline? And like, especially when we think about what our intent is supposed to be, even if it is like in the implantable region.
Might need to check with some health device expertise about if there's any regulation requirements, or we just relax it for future purpose.
I think Elliot fits the bill, at least as far as I know on that front. I know you're not.
I'm not doing implantables.
Yeah.
And I do note that up at the top of our page, we say this is paused until we have more feedback on implantables. So I'm, on the one hand, might suggest that we don't include it, or include it with a, make sure that we say this is draft. Because we really aren't sure what is here, and so use at your own risk. Or we leave it out.
So for a 1.2 decision,
Which I guess is just to update things from 1.1.
Yeah.
Remove errors.
Have we been expressing maturity levels on our material? I don't think so, right?
we should have a degree of it, but everything is still quite low.
Yeah.
Your artifacts list. So we have device on here is.
Yeah, it's up near the top there. It's right now we have it at level 0, which is draft, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm comfortable not changing that. But yeah, but for 1.2, maybe we do loosen things a little bit.
So we have to fix something for 1.2 because right now it's an error. But I think we have a decision about whether or not we just fix it, we uphold the current expectation and fix it, and then 2.0 have the conversation of, is the expectation actually need to be relaxed, or we change the expectation as part of fixing it. Are people feeling more strongly one versus the other?
Let's relax it. And that will make it usable. And then we can look at whether this is sufficiently, if we've said it's just draft, that suggests that there's not a commitment to maintaining it. So if we later in release 2 pull it out, we're okay.
So when we say relax, So with it technically address where it's applied, but right now it's an error. So we could relax it either by making it text or by making this a warning or by making this an informational piece. So it still shows up as an invariant after the actual path stuff has been fixed. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, warning or info, and relaxing that shall to a should or I don't know.
If we're making it a may, I would go with or actually if we want to totally relax, I would go to a may, is what I was gonna say. Yeah. If it's making it informational, it should be a may, I think. If we think it's still strong enough that it's a should, then I think that's a warning.
Just from the parent-children relation perspective, the bottom line is don't bring any panic to all those child IG designer. If there's any possibility to remove completely any kind of error or warning, make it looks like perfect or close to perfect, and then could help other implementers to adopt this baseline IG.
So Thomas, does that put you in favor for like keeping it but relaxing it or removing it?
Well, if there's no strong business case to support, evidence support it, then the question is why we need it.
And I think right now, what I'm hearing is like we're not totally sure that we do need it, but if we're thinking from the lens of 1.2 and trying to like keep from huge major changes, that like maybe we do a middle ground in 1.2 and then talk about, do we need it entirely as 2.0? That's like kind of my interpretation of how the conversation's been going.
And I think a different way, and I'm not sure, should we say, there's any assurance or guarantee that we should need this invariance there? What, there's any strong evidence to support we should put this invariance inside it to constrain this profile or not? I think this is my question coming the different way.
And right now, the only evidence, as someone very far away from the subject matter, is that while it's not represented in a invariant anymore in US4, there is still recommendations in US4 for representation of UDI information here. So there's still some textual reason that they're encouraging this. But that's the only thing I can note. So how would we, I'm going to take us to our simplifier page for this real quick. So let me just go to the baseline. I'm going to take us to the device profile and then let's document. Oops. Searching for device. Let's be on the second page because we've not touched it in a very long time. And let's see, medical, non-medical, implantable. Okay. This is to CA device 1 and CA device 2. So its current variant is creating an error in the validation of the profile, likely due to placement on the profile. Variant originally came, but has not received from US Core, but has not received any we've not received any feedback on our device profiles to date. Feedback for or against. further feedback. So Thomas, your basically case is that we haven't received any feedback, but we also don't have like the business case, like the business driver behind this. We can't say that on the call today. Right? And so I think that's putting you in the camp of like, prefer to like not keep something around if we can't actively make the case for it and the downstream impacts, because of the downstream impacts it has on other iGuide authors and the community, etc. Elliot, I think, am I right in saying like your perspective is one where it's like, well, we said that we were going to wait for feedback. We haven't received it to date. And therefore, like, we can't know one way or the other the answer of, is there a business reason for having this?
Correct.
How do we decide between the, like, so I think that puts you both in the position where you're saying, yes, we think that it's as an error invariant, it is too strong. I think Lorraine argued for like the middle ground, I think, between those two things, which is you can keep the invariant but make it informational, which effectively has like, it reduces the impact to downstream implementers and iGuide authors while buying us time to determine whether or not we wanted to keep it or to keep the device profile at all. Is there a better alternative that we can think of to that compromise, or would anyone not be comfortable with that compromise of making it an informational warning and correcting it so that the current technical error is resolved until we have this discussion around keeping it entirely in 2.0?
I'm good with that.
Is anyone not good with that? To bring the variant to a, I think you said May, Lorraine.
Yeah, that sounded like Elliot was making a motion, and I'll second that motion.
Sure.
Actually, okay, so do you want the motion, oh shoot, to include the piece around the 2.0? Just tell me if this is, I'm just writing it like, if that is what your intent is, or state it so that I can just write what you say. So until further discussion of whether to keep it all in 2.0.
No, the motion is to relax it to May and information. Period. We may revisit this and the entire resource or profile in 2.0 at a later point.
Okay, so
And if we decide that we're happy with it like this, we don't have to change it.
and you're comfortable, I said, like, we do have to actually correct the technical issues of its placement right now.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Are we comfortable with how this is phrased in the desire for your motion?
Yep.
All right. Lorraine, are you still comfortable seconding it?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone that wants to abstain? So maybe you haven't, maybe your dog just got let out and you haven't been listening to this conversation. You don't want to weigh in on the decision. You just want to abstain. Anyone want to abstain, or the next call I'll make is that, does anyone want to vote negative against this? Doesn't agree with this motion as we put it forward? All right, I think that leaves us with 8, not counting myself, 0. All right, so what we'll do is we'll make the correction to resolve the QA error. We'll shift it to an informational warning. And we'll have to just keep it in the backlog for items for discussions, in the 2.0 perspective. The other thing, I thought did we come to an agreement last time on text div? I had kept it on the device profile because I thought that folks wanted to actually discuss what the implications are of that before it was removed. Happy to have the other discussion as well, just very quickly. So this text piece, like when we have a structure definition, when we've made a profile, oftentimes as authors, we're writing kind of the differential for the profile. What has changed from the base resource of device? And so sometimes when we run it through tools like the differential, our profile, and we generate the snapshot, additional information can be appended in that like output file. So even if we author it with a smaller subset of information, when we run it through IG Publisher, sometimes like if you were to open up the outputted file, you get a much larger thing that often will include like a snapshot instead of just the differential and this text. We previously utilized that as the file that we loaded into the baseline. When we found the ability in Simplifier, when we received it, to not require the snapshot anymore and to be able to load profiles with just the differential, we removed the snapshot, but we never removed this piece, which is, it's not saying that anything about text within the profile, it's just the use of the text element to give like a rendering of, here's HTML for essentially, let me see if I can find it in the profile, HTML like for this page.
Just to back up, you said you've removed the snapshots?
From the actual, like, the profile that we load into GitHub. Because they should be generated dynamically as opposed to like us having to modify them every single time.
Okay, but the snapshots are still in the package that's deployed.
Correct. Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, sorry, you scared me there for a minute. Okay.
Yep. So still part of the package. But ultimately, like, this is just like one of those remainder pieces that stuck around. And to that point is still creating errors in the actual guide because of it, because there's stuff in this where it's like, oh, I can't figure out what the link is in that weird HTML table thing that is now out of date. So my proposal was, can
nice.
we do this? Because it doesn't change anything about the profile expectations, and it's essentially filigree that's become outdated.
Somebody last time, I think it was Paul, pointed out a recent problem with doing that, and I'm trying to remember what it was. My initial inclination was yes, it could go, but then I recall I backed off that.
Yes, so I think the thing is that the text element itself has to be there. But the div doesn't have to be necessarily.
So if, for example, I'm just going to make the modification. So within a given profile, what we want to avoid is making it so that you can't do this. So we want to make sure that we're not doing anything in our diff that would prevent us from having device.txt, like information about an actual instance be provided.
Right.
But this, which is not part of the actual profile expectations and is like describing the artifact, doesn't impact that.
Well, the question is that is .text a required element
Of a profile.
of a profile and or a resource? Yes, I mean certainly required in a resource, but is it required in a profile?
Well, is it required in?
Yeah, I don't think it's required.
I thought it was, but
let's see. So we've got domain.
I think we've got to go to the base resource to, yeah, here we go.
So
Text.
it's
Oh no,
optional.
it's optional. Okay, so I'm good. I think Paul was thinking that it might have been required, and that's where that conversation was coming from last week.
So with that in
Well-
mind, are we comfortable removing it?
Yeah, I'm good, as long as it's not required.
That should resolve something like 20 errors that we currently have. I can show you one of them if you're interested.
Sorry, you mentioned remove from differential
Nope, not from differential.
in the snapshot.
Nope, not from snapshot.
From the structure definition.
The actual, this piece is what we're removing.
But this structure definitions only keep the differential or both snapshot and differential.
This has no, like, if we were to move this, it has no impact on what's in the differential as snapshot.
Well, the definition of snapshot is, my understanding is the sustainable, the self-sufficient definition of this specific profile model. In that manner, I'm not sure, remove this text can make it this existing or changed snapshot modified profile can be still stand as a self-sufficient. But in the differential view without snapshot, I would say this can be removed because we still have a base URL there can also can, to trigger something to let the engine knows you have to automatically fill in all those missing snapshot part. That's my understanding.
So I think, so the issue with the snapshots is that Simplifier has a way of generating them itself. And so there's no need to provide them when we load the content into Simplifier. And so they were removed. And Simplifier will generate them when we build the package. Is that correct, Sheridan?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is a separate issue, though. There is this text, which is a rendering of the profile. And it's got links in it based on the way IG Publisher renders the profile, not based on the way Simplifier renders the profile. So those links are bad links. They point to things that don't exist. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll take a look at the one that's actually on device. So, or maybe it's not on device, but it's, yeah, so like these hyperlinks in these tables, it's basically saying like, hey, this didn't resolve. Because there's a bunch of like within the table HTML links. Then this would be like not stuff that we provided. This is like an HL7 link.
My understanding, this arrow in generated go through the conformance process, not exactly reflect the model, which is the original profile issues. And this is a logic issues. I cannot comment too much. If it's been generated by the IG publisher, and the ticket will be raised and may go through, yeah, you have DIV, have the conformance issues there might be removed or may have some way to put that the warning, with a dot text to suppress those errors.
I think it has been fixed. So like we'll test that theory. I think the problem is that like these URLs have probably slightly updated. And so what the publisher will produce right now for those tables probably has the correct one that doesn't actually create this error anymore. But because we've like stale dated ourselves by saying back in 2022, this was the code system and we put it into some HTML within the page, it's like we've kept ourselves in 2022, even though the tooling itself has fixed this.
Yeah, so that URL actually does resolve.
And my understanding, .div should not be parsed, being treated as a text. That's my understanding. I
Let's
don't know
try.
why they trigger out, why they go through the parsing process, go to .div. It's been well documented, FHIR as a description stated.
So I've removed the actual text from this one. Let's see what happens when we run diagnostic, we're gonna run publisher again and see if this resolves from diagnostic report. So I'm just gonna run it in the background while we go through this. Just so we can look at it together. I've done this with the other ones, which is why you don't see this coming up many other places. But I've kept it in a couple areas so that we could actually look at this. So I know it does resolve the issue, but if we want to look at it together, we can do that too. Let me just make sure. Okay. All right, it's just running now. So it may take a few minutes, but I think at the end of the day, we as a convention don't typically populate this unless as part of our differential. And so I think that this is kind of a non-issue, but it is important for us to talk about from an understanding perspective, because it is something that will get removed.
Well, there's no right or wrong here, in my understanding. And as long as it just if we go to HR7 basic profile there, they also specify, don't forget that this comes from domain resource, this comes from resource, or more strictly speaking, in a abstract domain space, abstract domain resource, abstract resource, and list all those optional metadata, whatever, at the very beginning of the resource, present in the IG, profile page, and the dot text could be removed from the structure definition profile directly.
Yeah, and I think that's part of our goal. I'm looking at this now. I actually think I've messed with a little bit of my this is telling me I've got to do something different with my template config. So we might not be able to show you what this actually looks like immediately, but we can probably show it on the next profiling call very easily. But we know that in the ones that I've removed it, that the errors are no longer present, which is good. And so if that remains to be the case when we do this with diagnostic report, end of it device, is there any concerns with us following suit and having that be part of just the overall cleanup that we do for 1.2? Removing the text.
I wish I could remember what the issue on my mind was last time.
There's a YouTube for that.
There is a YouTube for that.
Yeah.
Okay, I will take a look at that and see if watching that section of our discussion triggers it, and I will send you a note.
Okay. The V2, I was think a value set. Okay. So I think this makes sense, but so basically what we're going to do is we're just going to remove it from this explicit example. Where do we have diagnostic report? And confirm that it's not IGP that's actually creating this issue once the text resolves, because it's been something that the tooling's already fixed. I'll get this so we have an example of what it used to look like the next time that we look at this. Okay, so that's device and a little bit outside device with diagnostic report. We've got 8 more minutes. There's if we're shifting to allergy intolerance real quick and trying to take our conversations around device against allergy intolerance. There is one more invariant that we kind of have to look at fixing because it's currently still generating an error. And like we could go through, do the same type of fix that we have in some of these where we actually just fix the syntax and the location for this no allergy. But it was one that I wanted to raise that similarly, I've got, let me pull up allergy intolerance originally. This is one I don't actually think was originally an invariant, but we took the rules and we made them an invariant. So if I look up city baseline and I look at our allergy profile, actually, I'm going to show this to you guys in the actual baseline build because it has a QA issue with it. Okay, so we've got this like invariant no allergy here, right? It's being applied on this slice. And it is an error. And when we actually look at allergy within our QA, let's actually find real quick. Allergy intolerance. We have this, so where's no allergy? This one? No allergy, yep. It doesn't like the placement and the location of the FHIR path. And
Right.
so we can fix it like the others. But ultimately, I think we have that same question, which is like US core then, and I guess even now, considers these guidance and not hard rules. Let me find it. So again, similarly, I have this kind of like profile specific guidance around verification and how do you represent a known allergy. And that's here because it's around like good practice for that scenario as opposed to like a hard profiling rule. So maybe that we probably can't fix it today, but I think the question should be like, do we want to make this decision similarly, like fix it like we did with device and make the actual, do we need to change this as an expectation entirely as part of like a later date? Or like, is there appetite to try to fix this now? Like fix in terms of like, change the level of expectation.
I would say fix the invariant, correct the syntax error, and then we'll deal with the bigger issue later.
Questions on guidance versus warning versus error. Okay. Okay. And then that I think leaves us, I think that there's some similar questions and observation. There's 2 places observation is going to come up with some of these current errors. One is going to be the observation results, and another one is smoking status. I think these are both really good targets for next time because there's one which is basically to say like similarly we haven't been keeping up with the current expectations and maybe our current errors are also now out of alignment with what we're seeing in international guides. And then one is like you come in the observation results has an invariant when the system is fixed, which just seems really over modeled in my perspective. So we'll make the fixes. We'll start pushing them up. Like I have like an invariant branch. So the ones that we've talked about that we have applied are on that, and we'll start adding this to it. There's still, we've talked about this invariant this slicing in the past. It's something that I want us to chew on over the next week, which is to say, let me find it once more. We basically are now getting an error because we had, where's my verification status? We have a verification status with no set kind of additional cardinality here. And we used to have this convention where we basically would have like a slice where we said, like, if you were going to populate this, then this kind of conditional slice expectation comes into play. So if you're going to give me a verification status, then at least one of them has to come from the HL7 set, like one of the codings. Now, we are aware that the interpretation of this is actually, you have to supply a verification status. It changes, I think, how we resolve these types of errors, because I think the original intent was conditional, and now IGP is basically saying, like, IG publisher, that the interpretation actually isn't conditional, and the expectation is that if you're going to apply a minimum slice, then you should have a minimum cardinality on the anchor element. So I want us to actually chew on whether or not that's our expectation. I'm assuming it's probably not, because that's a pretty strict expectation. But it's another place that we have to make a correction one way or the other before 1.2. So if those sound like interesting topics, encourage you to join us 2 weeks from now. I think it's the
Very quick, just a little bit roll back to the connected URL discussion. Since you and other folks have collected quite a lot of experience go through this journey. I just wonder, I treat this baseline work as a collection of FHIR standard relevant stuff and materials. Can we put this another to-do list? Maybe not this next version release, and just give some guidance about how to pick up or correct your own canonical URI, how important it is for each IG design, and put it inside the next release. That'd be great, or provide some tangible document.
I saw somebody has started a style guide in Simplifier in the Canadian projects space. That might be a place to put it, although I don't know what the status of that document is.
There might also be some.
But I still treat Baseline as a one-stop shop in Canada for any, FHIR relevant development.
Can I ask, before we write like anything net new, Thomas, can I have you scan through, this is like my favorite bookmark. It's the like IG guidance, and it doesn't cover everything, but I'm finding more and more the things that like I run into questions for like, what's the best practice that HL7 has? I haven't seen it in this, but I haven't looked at every single page. So can I ask that you just take a peek, see if canonical shows up on any of these places, to see if there's established guidance on it? Because if it already exists, it actually might be a really good pointer that we can say, oh, hey, go here. And if it doesn't, it might be helpful from a Canadian context, but also more broadly. I just put it in the chat. I think that would be like a good homework to determine like what delta do we have to focus on.
I will take it over. Thank you much.
Thank you, Thomas. All right. So with that in mind, next week, I think you guys are chatting about, I won't be on, but we'll get Mike to start up, and Elliot, I think you and Jean, we're going to have a conversation around IGP publishing.
I haven't asked Jean yet, so
I'll send him a note.
okay.
Perfect. Okay, so if that's interesting to you about using the tooling to actually publish, next Friday, come back for our governance, and I'll just make sure you're sorted with the call-in details on Friday that you need. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a great long weekend.
And the same to you.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.